And welcome back to Taxation is Theft, the show that talks about all the ways the government is ripping you off and what you can do to stop them. Broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube from an underground bunker deep within the jungles of Mexico. I'm Dan, Taxation is Theft Berman, former candidate for president of the United States, currently in the race for governor of Texas. And tonight is a new episode of Debate Me, You Coward, the show where I pick fights with random people on the internet and invite them to debate me face to face. Almost. It's over the internet, so it's as close as we can get. So they can't just hide behind their keyboards in the underground bunkers of their mom's house, throwing out insults like racist, fascist, and moron. I can never pronounce racist right when I say it the first time. Maybe that's a good thing. Micah Efren is a Marxist, a secular humanist, and a socialist, and he's going to be debating me tonight. This is going to be awesome. But before we get started, if you're watching the live streams, please remember to like and share and comment, ask your questions, throw your shade, do everything in the comments. Most importantly, share it, invite your friends, start a watch party, share it on Twitter, do all that stuff. And tonight's episode is brought to you by the Nugg of Knowledge, indoor grown, chemical free, smokable hemp flower and Delta 8 vape cartridges. Get elevated at nuggofknowledge.com. And of course, head over to taxationistheft.info and support us by buying all of our capitalist swag, like these awesome hats and flags and t-shirts and everything else. But enough of that. Enough capitalism for now. Let's hear about Marxism. Micah, welcome. What's your problem, man?
Hello, Dan. By the way, it's Micah Irfan. Everybody always gets that wrong, so I don't blame you. But it's okay. It's okay. We've talked before, so it kind of hurts me.
I'm sorry, man. I'm used to like reading your name on because most of our talking is on Instagram, and I do have a problem with that. I kind of breeze over names way too fast unless it's like, for some reason, if it's like some really long jumble of letters, then I'm like, there has to be some words in there. And that's kind of when I start really focusing on it. Irfan, I'm sorry.
Short, but nobody mispronounces Dan. You know, you're kind of lucky in that situation. But we actually have.
Well, I had to change it to Dan.
You had
because when it was Daniel, for some reason, people kept calling me David.
People were getting Daniel wrong.
They were they were like, I would tell them Daniel, and then 2 seconds later they'd be like David. Weird. And then my last name is like totally Bierman. I get
that one I understand. That's kind of a hard one.
Misspelling.
But
the H is.
You know, okay, I'm not going to get off. We're supposed to talk, like we're supposed to argue in a second, but like my name's Micah, right? That's very common in Texas. Everyone spells my name Macha. It's like, have these people read the Bible? Like, come on. I thought we were supposed to be like a pretty Christian place. I've never met anybody.
Weird.
Yeah. Anyway, my problem, right? So
that's a weird way. I mean, like even like I'm trying to picture it. Like if I never saw it spelled before, and I'm like trying to sound it out and write the letters, like I don't know how I would get that.
Macha.
Yeah. There you go.
Anyway.
Awesome.
You asked me what my problem was. My problem is that there's a very small minority within our society that control all society's wealth and power, and they control the government. And we want to get rid of that. You know, there's tons of economic cycles that we have. There's massive income and wealth inequality. Our productivity growth, our economic growth is pretty much stagnating. That sucks. And I want to do something about it. And that's why I believe in socialism, so we can actually have the people democratically own their own economy instead of a small minority, oligarchic minority that owns everything and kind of leeches off of everyone else.
Right. Well, I think, and I really agree with like how you started off that statement by saying there are a very small group of people who control everything, the wealth and power and everything else. But when I guess the typical socialist, communist ideal is let's figure out a way to make everybody equal and put everybody on an equal playing field. But the reality is, if you were to do that today and everybody had the exact same amount of everything, forget about scarcity and all that. If everybody had the exact same today, we'd all be different again tomorrow, because someone's going to say, oh, well, I appreciate what I have. I'm going to save it. Somebody else is going to say, oh, I'm going to trade all this in for something else, or more of one thing or less of something else. And we're all going to continue to go down our path and end up with different things. So, and I get it. That's not exactly what socialism is, right? It's not like, okay, let's take all the money and make sure everybody has exactly $10 right now.
That's not what it is.
That's not it. But I mean, like that's kind of an exaggeration of it. But I think there is still kind of some realism to that. And I guess when I look at, yes, we have an extremely wide gap between the extremely wealthy and everybody else, but that gap, I don't think having some people who have more and some people who have less is really that big of a deal. If you have, some people want to work harder and they want to gain more, and that's fine, and other people are happy with what they have.
But
it's this system where we have now where it's like we say it's the haves and the have-nots, but the have-nots aren't really the have-nots. They're the have less than nots. They're in debt. Like it's like having less than nothing. And it's not like they just made a bunch of bad decisions to get there. It's in my opinion, and this is probably where we're going to differ, the government has laid out all these programs and taxes and regulations that make it easy for other, capitalists and all, everybody else to be like vultures and take everything that they have. The government takes everything that they have and then distributes it to the wealthy and powerful. So, yeah, well, let me just finish that thought there and see what you have to say about that.
Okay, all right. Now you can't give me so much to address at once. Hopefully, we could do like smaller chunks of this. So
yeah,
I don't
don't let me start talking. I'll just keep. I won't.
It's okay. Yeah, I do this sometimes. So first of all, when it comes to like what socialism is, socialists, we acknowledge like this contradiction of capitalism that leads to these massive inequalities that end up making the government corrupt. We call it the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Very complicated language, but basically the government doesn't serve you. It doesn't serve any of us except for a small minority. And you can acknowledge they're not acting in the interest of us. And we think these are all inevitable, effects of this process of capital accumulation that happens because of private property. If I can, let's say, own one apartment building and I don't have to work there, but I can just leech a little bit off of it. I know you got angry whenever I was saying that in one of my tweets. I can spend that money on getting more capital and more capital and more capital. And this is what you see. You have all these extremely wealthy people and they accumulate more and more, and their labor isn't even involved in the creation of that value and actually doing anything. They just own it. So we say, well, in this process, there's a lot of people that are doing labor and contributing to society that aren't being compensated. And there's a lot of people that are benefiting from that labor that are taking it. So what we do is we want to get rid of that private property contradiction, and we want to replace it with things like worker ownership or public ownership in order to stop that leeching, in order to stop that massive imbalance. I'm totally fine with workers that work harder and people that contribute more getting paid more. I just don't want them to exploit people and get paid for just owning stuff, not actually contributing anything socially useful.
Right. And this is actually something that's I've been talking about this a lot lately for whatever reason. But okay, when you negotiate, right? When you're having a negotiation with somebody. So let's say you go to an apartment and you're like, "Hey, I want to rent this apartment." And they're like, "Okay, fine. It's going to be $1,500 a month." And you're like, "Oh my God, that's too much. I'll pay you $1,000 a month." If they say, they might say, "Okay, we'll do $1,450," or they might say, "No, $1,500. That's it, because I got someone else who's willing to pay it. If you don't want it, get out of here." If everybody were able to say, "Well, that $1,500, you're stupid. No one's going to pay that much. I'm going to leave," then obviously the landlord is not making any money because it's unoccupied. So that's an incentive for him to say, "Okay, fine, I'll lower the price so someone will want to do this." Ultimately, it is your ability to say, "No, I don't want it," and walk away that causes a landlord to lower the price, right? This is your best leverage, your best bargaining chip, right? Because there can be, it can be anything, like this little piece of plastic, right? How much would give me $1,000 for this piece of plastic? You're gonna look at me, why? I don't want that. You're gonna walk away, right? And I'm gonna say, "Wait, come back. I'll give it to you for less." And like, even though this is absolutely worthless to you, I don't know, you probably wouldn't want to buy it, but like at some point, like, if I lower the price enough, you say like, "Oh, okay, well I guess that could be useful as a doorstop or something. I'll pay 25 cents for that." Okay. But your ability to walk away is ultimately your control over the landlord and his rent. But you don't have the ability to walk away when it comes to rent, and that is not because of the landlord. The landlord did not create the property tax that prevents you from finding your own land and building your own house, because we're talking about, living off of your own labor, right? Building your own house, having your own shelter, separate from a landlord, right? If that ability is taken away from you, you don't have anywhere that you can live. You can't live in your car because they'll tow your car, or they'll give you a ticket, or they'll tell you to move and all this other stuff. You can't live in your RV for all the same kinds of reasons. You still have to license it. You still have to pay just to exist. So at some point you're going to say, okay, well, I want an apartment and I can't afford the house, so I'm going to pay for the apartment. And you don't have the ability to just walk away. That's not from the landlord. That's from the government. And yes, government and corporations and some of these rental places like apartments are big corporations, right? They'll build a big 1,000-unit apartment complex and say, like, okay, those guys are paying government. They are paying they are paying representatives and donating to campaigns and all these other things to make sure there are laws in place so that they can charge high rents. That's definitely something to address. But ultimately, it is when you go to an apartment or to a house and you want to rent it, you are voluntarily agreeing to say, I want to live there. This is what I'm willing to pay. And you negotiate. And that's it. If you don't have the ability to walk away and say, I don't want to rent, I don't want to rent from anybody, if that ability is taken away from you, then that is your biggest bargaining chip. And that's why our rent is so high.
Okay. So there's a lot right there. You hit me with another, like a whole ton of different things, but that's fine. So
take as much time as you need.
Yeah. So first of all, there's a power imbalance in your negotiation. Now, let me just preface everything I say from this point on with my general ethical principle, because there's some axioms we use when we're trying to decide what kind of economic or social system is preferable. I think about it in the sense I'm a consequentialist. I want whatever society and social and economic system is best that causes the greatest amount of well-being for people. That's really my priority: increasing people's well-being, decreasing their suffering. So I don't really care about some deontological things like, like technically this was consensual in some sort of way and all the sums of the contracts end up being consensual. I don't care about that. I just care about what it actually affects, like how it actually affects people. Now, when it comes to your negotiation with the landlord, there is a power imbalance there because your choice is either get a house or be homeless. And property taxes don't give, like, they're not, I don't understand your view on this. Like, you think of property taxes.
If you don't pay your property tax, the government will drag you out of your house.
Yeah, but that's irrelevant. If you don't pay your rent, they'll drag you out of your house. If you don't just automatically get access to land if there's no property taxes, you still don't have property. Now there's just no taxes. Like, there's still an issue there. Whenever you're negotiating with the landlord, you still have to say yes to one of them, or you're homeless. Even if
why couldn't you go? Why there is unoccupied land in the United States that anyone can.
You should all just all own that, like commons, or like what?
I'm not saying. Well, I mean, so the way the government has done it is to say, oh, there's this giant forest. I'm going to draw a circle on a map, and this is all our property, right? And
just
what?
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, just like the first cat. I mean, at one point, the world went from not owned to owned. Random people said, we own this land. We own these natural resources. They didn't make them. That's why I've actually said in the past, property is theft, because technically somebody had to randomly said this is ours at one point without actually making it, right? If we're being honest, they didn't make the land, but they claim
right.
That's what the capitalists did. That's what the government's done.
Right. Except let's say, I don't want to say capitalist, but an individual who claims a small piece of land for his own personal use is not taking that from anybody else, because there's nobody else there saying, I want that land. There's no dispute. And yeah, you get enough people and you get enough land, eventually that's probably going to happen. But at the point we're at now, there's enough land where there's nobody laying any claim to any of this land except for the government. Just because land they've never set foot on, they're saying, oh, you can't do anything there because that's ours. And so they're creating an artificial scarcity of land. Why, if you wanted to, and there is unoccupied land where people could just go and build their homes, why shouldn't they be able to do that?
Well, I mean, this is a very odd situation. So let's say the government, like, it's Dan Berman world.
How is this odd?
He's become like supreme dictator of the United States, but like he's used his supreme dictatorial powers to abolish the government and taxes and pretty much all this stuff, except for like the legal system that you kind of want to keep and stuff like that. All the land that is currently public is unclaimed. Okay, so people go and claim it. What's to say they can't claim all of it? I mean, like, what's the limit on the amount?
So
they can
you're saying an individual should be able to claim as much land as the government has claimed?
No, like I'm saying that this is like your solution to like homelessness is very weird because people will just go.
No. I'm not saying
all of it.
I'm not saying in any way this is a solution to homelessness. I'm saying this is where, when you talk about a division of power or an inequality of power, this is where that comes from. It's your ability to walk away. I mean, I might not want to go live in the middle of the forest, but the fact that I can go live in the middle of the forest, that's my minimum requirement. I mean, think about it like, let's look at food for an example, right? Because food's much easier to explain. If there's a forest and I can go pick an apple from the forest and I can eat it, right? That's essentially free food. Now I walk into right next to this forest, there's a restaurant, right? And I can go into this restaurant. This restaurant can say, well, it's $100 for a sandwich. Why would I pay $100 for a sandwich when there's a free apple right here? Versus, and you can look at the same comparison when you look at an airport. Why is it like $10 or $15 for a sandwich in an airport versus $3 for a sandwich outside of an airport? It's supply the same thing. You have, it is because you have a monopoly on the restaurants. Nobody can just walk into the airport and say, I'm going to set up a restaurant. That is all the restaurant's property. And this is the same way that the government works when the government says all these businesses are within my property. And so therefore they must license to the government in order to exist. When you have a restaurant inside of an airport, you're now licensing to the government, but also to the airport itself, which is acting as a government to that restaurant. So you can't just say, oh, well, I don't want to pay $10 for a sandwich. I'm going to go outside of the airport to get my $3 sandwich, because then you're going to have to waste all this time. You're going to have to go all the way over there. You're going to have to come all the way back through security. All of these problems create where it's like, you can't just say no. You can't just turn down the $10 sandwich, or you can eat before you go to the airport, which is free, but relatively. But the point is, you don't have that power to say, I just don't want to do that. I'm going to go. And when it comes to have a roof over your head, that is your only option. I mean, like I said, worst case scenario, if rent got to $100,000 a month, would you pay it, or would you say, fuck you guys, I'm going to live in my car? Right? That's your option to say, I'm going to walk away.
I mean, I guess.
But now imagine if the police say, oh, you can't sleep in your car. We're going to arrest you if we catch you sleeping in your car.
Well, that's stupid.
They're taking, I agree.
So like, wait,
they're taking away your ability to walk away and say no to the rent. They're telling you, hey, well, yeah, I agree. That guy's charging $100,000 a month for rent. That's insane. That's so stupid. I wouldn't pay that either. But if you sleep in your car, you're going to jail. So you better find someone who's only charging $99,000 for rent and pay him instead. That's what these laws are doing, and forcing you they're forcing you to not have the ability to walk away.
Okay. So I agree with you with a lot of the problems, but I think the solution, that's what I'm calling peculiar. Okay. So you remove the government from this equation. Now you can go claim the land, because you don't believe in keeping it as like a commons, right? Like a commons, the forest is everyone's. You believe in people being able to claim it. So now you need to create some sort of system in which they can actually own that land and they can protect that land without just kind of one person arbitrarily coming in and saying, this is all my forest. And eventually you acknowledge with as people disperse and as demand for that land grows, you're going to be faced with the same problem. If you really want a society where every single choice is voluntary, and you don't have the situation where you're stuck in you're stuck trying to say either I'm homeless or I go, pay this guy this absurd price, then you should just kind of be advocating, I guess, public options for everything, right? You should be like saying, we should have a jobs guarantee. We should have a food guarantee. We should have an income guarantee. We should have a housing guarantee. Then you actually have a legitimate way to opt out and say, okay, I'll take this basic accommodation. Your solution is kind of like be homeless and hope there's land that you can go to and there's food you can grow there, which won't always exist. We both acknowledge. I'm sorry.
Right. No. It is not because here's the thing, right? We have more houses in the United States than we have people. Right.
Yeah.
We have more unoccupied houses than we have homeless people, right? But first of all, who are these houses owned by?
Usually some of them people are foreign investors.
Yes, there's some foreign investors. There's banks. Banks own a lot of it. There's government. Government owns a lot of it. Houses that they've seized through property taxes. And then they usually sell them for pennies to investors and all these other things.
Far cheaper, yeah.
Now, right. Now, the thing is, you have a market, and here's a clear example of this market, right? If you have actual competition in a market, people are going to say, "Oh, well, I'll lower my price. I'll lower my price," right? And usually what happens is there's a floor on that. So for let's say for a landlord who whether it's a house or an apartment, there's a floor on what they can charge for rent, right? So they're still paying property tax, they're still paying maintenance and all these other things, right? They're not going to rent it for anything less than that because they at least have to not lose money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the floor that they can charge for rent. If you get rid of the property tax, they can lower the floor. They can lower their rent. And this is the same thing when you have when you own a house and you've paid off your entire house, you're still paying rent to the government through property tax every single month. If you don't pay it, you get evicted. Same thing. If you were to, let's say, for example, you bought a house, you have your mortgage payments. If you were to eliminate the property tax from that and still make the same monthly payments, so now the money that is not going to the government is going to the bank, you'd pay off your mortgage in 10 years less. So now instead of 30 years of debt, you've only got 20 years of debt. There's a government program called the FHA, which has made it not easier to buy a house, easier to get into debt. Before the FHA, people would buy houses, they'd have them paid off in 5 years. Now they're paid off in 30 years. Why? Because the banks say, "Oh, we'll make a stupid loan because the government's backing it up."
Oh, the loan guarantees. The loan guarantees. Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah.
And so okay.
It's just another program. And so all of these things combined they're putting people in debt, and they're making, and then, what happens when you're in debt? Oh, you have bad credit, so you can't get a mortgage. So even though a mortgage might be less than rent, you're not able to get that. And then the houses are more expensive because of the FHA. You look at when they implemented that, the market prices skyrocketed. The same thing that happened in 2008 when they were doing easy loans, free money, the market prices go up. So all of these things the government is doing is making it more difficult for people to buy their homes. Buying your home is an alternative to paying rent, which is the same option as walking away from the rent, walking away and saying no. It's another way that your options have been taken away.
I like home ownership. I think that's awesome. And I don't want to get gaslighted into like defending the current government. Now, I do think the logic that everything's the government's fault is not good. It's poor. Obviously, capitalism has tons of market failures. And like I said earlier, I believe that a lot of the government's actions are the product of this concentration of wealth and power that happens inevitably in capitalism. It has happened historically. It's happened in every single capitalist society we've ever seen in the history of the world. That's why I think many of your friends, your comrades, would say capitalism has never been tried, because every single time some form of capitalism comes about, it corrupts itself. It's the natural progression of things. So I think you have, but regardless, you still have to acknowledge that your taxes do go somewhere. If you don't have them, that's destructive. There's a thing called social goods and externalities. So there's externalized costs that are beneficial to everyone if we pay for them collectively. Now, like I said, I don't like the current government, but one thing is education. In a socialist society, I think public education should, of course, be free because it has social benefits, tons of social benefits, other than just the benefit of, let's say, the consumer saying, "Oh, now my child is educated." There is tons of ramifications that are beneficial. And there's many other things like that. Such another one is public transportation. Public transportation not only is nice for you because you get to take a train and get somewhere else, but it also saves society a lot of environmental costs, and it saves society a lot of traffic accident costs and more expensive car infrastructure costs. All those things are external to consumers and firms, but they are important to pay for in some sort of way. So that's the original like beneficial aspect of taxation. But I do want to talk about this more. I'd rather actually not even talk about socialism very much. I want to hear more about this Dan Berman. Like, is it an anarcho-capitalism? Like how it would actually function?
So Well, okay. Well, let me say this first, because we're throwing around words like capitalism, and talking to somebody talking to libertarian socialists, Marxists, like, and understanding what their view of what capitalism is. I've come to a better understanding of the fact that we all just have different understandings of what these words mean. Same with socialism. There's a million different people who have different understandings of what socialism is. For that reason, I don't like to use the word capitalism as much as what my preferred system would be. Even anarcho-capitalism, I prefer voluntarism, where all agreements between people are voluntary and consensual. So, with that said, you're right. We've had capitalist systems. Oh, it's not real capitalism. The same as socialist systems. Oh, it's not real socialism. That have all failed, right? Capitalist and socialist. But the reason they fail is all the same. And that reason is that we always end up with a government which is going to be centralized and powerful, which is going to enforce, whether it's capitalism or socialism, on everybody. It's going to say, hey, we have these rules that everybody must follow. And these rules, by the way, are written by a very small group of people. And as the power is collected and as the resources are collected to the government, who is going to be the honorable trustee of all of these amazing resources, who is going to diligently make sure that everyone gets their fair share of it, it always turns out that these people have this power and they decide not to exercise it that way. So in communism or socialism, you have the same thing. You have all of the money and wealth is transferred to the government so that they can provide things like schools. And what happens when the government starts providing schools? Well, let's see. We think everyone should learn this, and we don't think anyone should learn this. So we're going to create a curriculum, and across the entire nation, we're going to enforce that curriculum. There's no freedom outside of that. We see when the government starts banning books that says, oh, yeah, these are banned from the curriculum. You can't have it. We see teachers who are punished for teaching things that are outside of the curriculum. We have the sky flag worship ceremony at the beginning of every day of public school. It always ends in disaster. And whether it's socialism or capitalism, what you always have is you have a bunch of people who are seeking power, and they're always going to use that power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's always going to end up that way. And whether these rules are to, these rules that they create are socialist, where it's going to be, okay, we're going to make sure that everybody has access to healthcare and education and all this other stuff. There's plenty of corruption to be had there. There's, even if everybody gets what they're supposed to get, there's people still stealing from the system every part of the way. And the reason for that is not because the system is not imperfect. It's because the system itself cannot be perfect. What you're doing is you're saying everything goes into this one bucket, and then we're going to give it back out from this bucket. We're going to pay taxes into this bucket, and whoever's going to control that money is going to control the system. And that person is always the one person who gets to say, oh, well, I got to give some to my cousin and my brother and my friend over here. And that's how you get the corruption. But if you get rid of that and say, oh, well, we have our resources over here, and maybe it's me individually, maybe it's me and a group of friends, and say, hey, we want to educate people, and we want to build a school, and we want to educate people. We have that control. And if people want to send their kids to our schools because they like how we're teaching them, that's absolutely fine. And if they think that what we're teaching is crap and it's propaganda and indoctrination, they can say, yeah, we're not going to go to your schools. We're going to go somewhere else. But as soon as you have one system, whether it's capitalism or socialism, that mandates everybody has to follow the same rules, participate the same way, have the same education and everything else, you take away the freedom of choice from every individual.
Okay. Well, there's a lot to say about that. Now, first of all, I don't do the not real socialism thing. I think that's a cop-out. I think you don't believe that we live in, like, you prefer voluntarism to real capitalism. I generally like to say I'll claim credit for systems that are similar to what I want, even if I don't like them. So I consider historical socialism as flawed. I think it was better than capitalism, flawed in many ways. The Soviet Union was very ossified and bureaucratic, but it did industrialize society, got rid of the feudal landlords, got rid of pogroms, which were a disgusting anti-Semitic practice of, do you know about it? Basically massacring Jewish people. And they raised the living standards of people extremely quickly. Now, I think that there's a lot of awesome things that we should look at there, and you shouldn't just dismiss it all under some precipice that it wasn't voluntary. I think it's kind of an elusive idea. Like I said, consequentialism. I'm trying to think about the well-being of people. I'm wondering, do you believe in consequentialism, or do you consider yourself deontological in your ethical beliefs?
Sorry, hold on a second. Are you there?
You're gonna look it up?
Okay. No. My headphones just died on me. But yeah, I do need to look that one up. And I totally just lost what the word was because like my headphones talk to me.
That's fine. That's fine. So basically, I'll just summarize this very, very quickly for everybody. A lot of times when I'm debating like capitalists or anarcho-capitalists or voluntarists or any other ideology, we kind of get lost because we have different values, right? We kind of like, you might say this is voluntary and that's what really matters. And, everybody has individual choices in this system. And other people may say, well, everybody's equal in this system, so we should like it. And there's democracy. All those things don't actually matter to me. What matters to me the most is the well-being of people. And that's consequentialism. It's thinking about what are the actual consequences and the effect on the well-being of people by these certain social systems. And that's what matters, just kind of the aggregate effect they have on people. Deontology, and I'm absolutely like I'd say simplifying this to the max. Deontology thinks there's kind of just fundamental ethical principles that doesn't really matter what the consequences of them are. They're just right. So for example, shooting someone's always bad, even if they're about to kill someone or they're about to like rape someone. You can't shoot them. Stealing is always bad, even if this person like totally stole it from someone else. Those are deontological principles. So I'm asking you, whenever you're trying to figure out what economic system you think is best and what social system you think is best, do you do it on the basis of what is its effect on the well-being of people, or do it on the basis of well, it's voluntary, so that's what matters?
Right. I think I kind of want to say it's somewhere in the middle there, because you have. So what I look at is, first, the same rules should apply to everybody, right? So if I'm able to do something, you should be able to do something. If someone with $1 trillion is able to do something, I should be able to do that. Now, granted, I might not have access to the same resources. You might not, we might not, whatever. That changes circumstances. But all things being equal, do I have the right to do something? Do you have the right to do something? And so things like stealing, right? If stealing is always wrong, and of course this goes into the definition of words. What is stealing? Taking something that doesn't belong to you, right? Of course, this has a foundation on property and property rights. And of course, if we don't agree on what property rights are, then our definitions of what stealing is are fundamentally going to be different. Is it wrong to kill somebody? Well, there are a lot of if you go into the legal system, killing and murdering are completely different. Murdering is intentionally taking someone's life. Killing might be in self-defense. And so
I know. Yeah.
So we create these divides. And so I think, for everybody to have good well-being is great. And to that effect, I can say, okay, look, we can look at the people who do not have, they don't have good well-being. That's a weird way to say that,
they're
but
not well off. They're suffering and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, we're looking at people who are suffering, and why is that, right? How did that happen? And if we can look at that and we can say, well, they were robbed of something, whether it was property, whether it was a right, whether it was a freedom, whatever was taken from them that put them into that situation, then we should very first look at that and say that was wrong, that shouldn't have happened, and what can we do to stop that or prevent that from happening to other people? To say that everybody should just be well off. Well, I mean, people are born with deformities, and maybe it's genetic, whatever the case may be, a birth defect, and that person is going to have a very different life than most other people. Does that mean that society should then steal from other people to then attempt to turn this person into, like, maybe they have a missing leg? To attempt to turn this person into somebody who has both legs, like to steal from other people, to attempt to correct one person when maybe that person doesn't even really want this. Like, what is the definition of well-being? How far ahead does somebody have to be considered well off, right? And what we have to realize is everybody has different circumstances. Everybody alive today is going to die at some point in their life, right? We can talk about like, oh, healthcare would be great. It's going to extend our life by a couple years. Yeah, really. So what? Who cares? And I know that matters differently to different people, right? Some people are like, oh man, I wish I could live forever because I want to see what the future's like. Some people are going to say, oh man, I wish I could live forever because I'm afraid of death. Other people are like, man, when it's my time to go, it's my time to go. But the reality is we don't have much control over that. As human beings, all we know is at some point we're probably going to die. I mean, maybe at some point in the future we get to live forever, who knows. But my point is this: a lot of people, and especially when you have politicians, whether they're capitalists or socialists, saying, hey, well, if we just implemented this one policy, you'd have better healthcare and you'd live forever. Then what you're doing is you're convincing people to change the course of nature, and that not only that, yeah, maybe you could, and maybe that's great, but that should be a human right. It should be a human right for you to last longer as a human being than God intended for you to. And we're going to make that happen by forcing people to help you live longer who don't want to help you live longer. And so you have this, what is considered well-being, and that's completely subjective to every single person. So, do you really want to say, okay, well, we can make everybody's life a little bit better, we're going to have to steal from people?
Okay, so I think that maybe after this I can send you some stuff on this. It'd be pretty interesting because these are actually just like fundamental like philosophies, ethical philosophies that you kind of have to build everything on top of. Now, whenever we're trying to figure out what economic system and social system is preferable, we have to start from one like key ethical understanding, right? And the two options that we're primarily faced with is, should we try to prioritize people's well-being, which is decreasing their suffering and increasing their happiness, which is an objective thing. We can define those scientifically. We can understand those scientifically. It's not something that I define for myself and you define for yourself. And then do we build rules on top of that, such as stealing is bad because it generally decreases people's well-being. Murdering is bad because it generally decreases well-being, but everything's relative to that. Or do we come to that deontology, which is basically like, well, I'm going to make up some sort of arbitrary definition of what property is and what theft is, and then you can't do this no matter what the effect on well-being is. And it has nothing to do with well-being. It's just wrong, and it's just right, and it's just wrong. And that's very arbitrary ethics, and I don't personally believe in it. So I was actually just asking a question to kind of figure out so I could communicate properly with you. So whenever I look at our current system, I think about how can we create one that works better for everyone. I see that there's a very small minority that controls everything, and this is a natural product of our current economic system and any capitalist economic system in history. So the way to change it is to look at what is working now, what's worked in the past, and what we can rationally understand will work. We've seen that plenty of these public programs, public housing, public education, public healthcare have worked phenomenally better than private provisions of those same things, even in capitalist countries with corrupt governments. So we should do those things. We should switch to a system instead of having a small minority of people that only prioritize increasing their profits. We should switch to a social system where we all democratically, not just a few people, but we all democratically decide on economic plans so we can actually propel our society forward. So if we want to, let's say, have green energy, we can actually choose to use society's resources to do that instead of a bunch of little greedy capitalists lobbying the government in order to increase their fossil fuel subsidies and absolutely destroying the environment that we all have to pay the cost of ourselves. If we want to choose to, let's say, grow our economy far faster so we can eventually have the real freedom, which is the freedom from having to work. We can all just kind of do what we want. We as a society can invest in ourselves far faster than this current capitalist system does in automation. And that's what communism is. A little segue. This is what I talk about whenever I talk about communism. I believe that the ultimate freedom, the freedom that really matters, that I want people to have, is the ability to choose what they want to do with their time and actually be able to do it. And that's the idea that we're pursuing. We want this socialist economic system so that we can become so productive as a society and automate so much of that work away that eventually we can get to a point where me and you, we can debate all day if we want to. We can go fish, we can go hunt, we can go do whatever the hell we want, because no longer are we enslaved to having to constantly fight for what Marx says, the means of subsistence, income, trying to just scrape enough together to survive.
Right. And I actually completely agree with that. That is real freedom, when we should not have to work, 40-hour jobs just to stay alive.
Exactly.
But this goes back to the idea of rent. Like, what happens? Why are we always focused on, we need 0% unemployment, right? We need to everybody needs a full-time job. That's what the government's doing. And even the socialists who are, and maybe that's not socialism, but that's what socialists are pushing is, we need more jobs, we need higher wages and all these other things. They don't focus on, well, no, we don't want higher wages. We want less hours and, the same income. But it's the same thing, right? What does it matter what you earn if all of what you earn gets thrown away because it's going to rent, or it's going to taxes or whatever else? If it's all being taken away from you, what does it matter how much you earn? And I completely agree. If we replace everything with automation, we'll eventually get to the point where we've got machines taking care of the farms that are growing all the food out of the farms and just putting them on trucks, and the trucks are driving themselves to the grocery stores. That would be amazing. But what's interesting is, like, you have, and maybe, like I said, maybe this isn't socialism, but the people who generally push socialism are saying, like, oh no, Walmart's installing the self-checkout stuff. We need to make sure that we have people standing at the thing checking your food out for you, because that's jobs. And they want to create, this system where everybody's more employed, and everybody's, this is how we distribute the wealth, is through everybody working.
I can actually speak really well.
What's that?
I can actually answer this. Can I just answer? Okay. I don't want to interrupt. I don't like to be disrespectful. But those are what we call, like, usually liberals. They're people that see a problem with capitalism and they don't like at the root. They kind of just try to address the consequence. And that's very stupid, right? Let's just create jobs. We don't even need people to work. Let's just create jobs, right? Let's keep the stupid insurance companies around, even though we could eliminate all their jobs with Medicare for all. You see all the Republicans talking about this. They're like, it will eliminate so many jobs. Good, because they're not doing useful work. I don't care about eliminating jobs. I want full employment so that people can get a job if they want, so they can get an income. But I wouldn't, like, keep everyone's hours the same. If we have full employment and we don't need people doing work, we should lower their hours, like 100%. The only reason why we have like we may keep the same hours for a little while in a socialist system is to invest more labor into making society more productive. So eventually we can reduce your hours. So I want less labor time. We all want less labor time for people.
Okay. So on that, then the problem is not the amount of income that people are getting. The problem is the cost of living, right? That's what everything is, right? It's a ratio of income to expense. And so if you can eliminate virtually most of a person's expense, which is their rent and their food, rent is like, 30 to 50% for a lot of people. If you can eliminate that, and like I said, eliminating that through property tax is one way. And this is why, and not to say that you agree or disagree with any of this, I guess is the way I should be saying things now, because I can see, I guess, yeah, I don't want to make any assumptions. Yeah, sorry, I'm like,
it's okay.
I'm coming out of programmer mode right now, so my vocabulary is a little bit off. Yeah. I don't want to make any assumptions about what you believe, but so we have this idea of we have this concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. And when I look at that, I see, first of all, we have all these people who own their homes, and all these homes are being taken away because through taxation, through property tax, people are being forced to then say, maybe they're retired and they have a house, and hey, I live here in this house. When I die, I can leave it to my kids. They have a house. Nobody has to pay for anything. They don't have to go to work. Maybe everything's fine with that, but they have to pay the property tax. And in order to pay the property tax, which has to be paid in the national currency, you have to go into town and get a job and start working more hours in order to get that, just to keep what you already had. So you have the inheritance tax, which takes that away, the property tax, which takes that away. And interestingly enough, too, as more people are being forced into the labor pool because they have to pay for this basic cost of living, now you have a greater amount of competition. So now you have lower wages, right? Because anyone's like, oh, I could hire anybody. But if you only had one worker and you got 10 spots, it's like, okay, I really need this guy to stay. I'll pay him a little bit more, right? So there's an artificial, I guess it's an artificial scarcity of jobs, because you have this artificial inflation of a workforce because you're forcing them to continue to work so that they can continue to pay the taxes. And you have this through this concentration of wealth. And you can look at the farms that do the exact same thing, right? You might have had a family-owned farm that had like 100 acres, and then the grandfather who owned that died and had to pass it to his kids, and they had to pay the inheritance tax or the extra property tax on that, so they had to sell half of their farm. And when you have 1,000 farms doing this, you end up with these giant corporate farms that start consolidating everything, and now you have this one giant corporation who's able to take everything.
Yeah, it's what always happens. It's constant accumulation. Economies of scale, like, they're beneficial in the way that we like big enterprises because they're more efficient. The issue is you get a very small minority of people that have all these terrible effects we both acknowledge, and then they corrupt the government. And that's one of the things I say, well, this is necessary, but it creates an oligarchy. How do we fix it? And I actually want to touch on this point. Both you and me agree that we want people to work less, right? We want people to work less. We want people to have more liberty. Well, and you talk about taxation. People their incomes or their costs are too high. I think their costs are too high and their incomes are too low. And that's not only because of taxation. It is partially because of taxation, because the government taxes you to give to the corporations and to do the war machine, killing kids in Iraq and killing people in Syria and Afghanistan. The terrible things they're doing. But the other part is surplus extraction. Surplus extraction. The capitalists, whenever you work for a big firm, right? Part of the value that all of these workers create goes to these very rich people, these capitalists. They don't have to do anything. Jeff Bezos is making billions of dollars. He just stepped down as CEO. He can step down as COO too. COO. He can stop doing all of his work and still be getting massive, massive incomes, which he can reinvest in more capital and become even richer and buy even more publications like the Wall Street Journal and buy even more politicians and become even more powerful. So the solution, I think, isn't just saying, oh, let's get rid of the government aspect of this. Let's get rid of this whole entire oligarchical system, and let's replace it with one that actually is able to be incentivized to decrease people's working times, is actually able to distribute work like rationally, instead of giving one person a 45-hour, 50-hour job and making tons of people unemployed. Why don't you just split those hours among everybody? Give them all the option to have that job. That makes way more sense. And that's just one of the contradictions we can solve with the socialist economic system versus this very irrational capitalist one.
Well, I think, okay, so you're talking about creating an incentive, and I think what's interesting about that is, I've run businesses before, and to some degree we had employees who worked 5 or 10 hours because they were specialized in something, and that's all we needed. But ultimately, when there's a certain demand for a certain talent, and you need that full time, or you need a lot of that, it makes more sense to have 40 and 40 and 40. And so if you want to incentivize, you're not really going to incentivize the company to have, let's say you have 5 employees working 40 hours when you could have 10 employees working 20 hours. There's no incentive. There's never going to be a natural incentive for the business to do that unless you give them like a subsidy or something. There's never going to be a natural incentive because it takes more to keep those employees trained and up to date and communicating with each other. And then something needs to get done during the day, and this employee is not here because it's his day off. That incentive is not going to be there. But if you give the incentive to the employees themselves to say, oh, my cost of living has gone down, I want to have a job because I want a little bit of money, but I'm not going to get one of these 40-hour jobs. That's ridiculous. And that's happening now, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, well, the government says I have to stay home. They're getting work at home jobs that they had before, which could have been work at home jobs, but the companies didn't want to do that because they wanted to be standing over their employees' shoulders. The incentive is now, the incentive has always been with the employee. They've always had, if I could work from home, that would be amazing. Now they have an opportunity. But the incentive to work fewer hours is always going to come from the employee, because just when we talk about an economy of scale or efficiency, it's more efficient to have a single person who can work. And once you get to 60 hours, they're less efficient. But working 40 or 50 hours, because that's one person who knows what they're doing, who can continue this work and get in the habit of doing that thing. It's less to employ, less paperwork and all this other stuff. So the incentive has to come from the employee. But I want to get back to something that you keep talking about, which is we have to find a system that works for everybody. And I think this is one of the things where maybe we fundamentally disagree, because I think the problem with the system that we have now is that this system was created in every country. Those systems are created because everybody says, if we only had this one perfect system, and the reality is, if we want different things, that means we want different systems. And so now we have a system that is an aggregation of all the things I want and all the things that somebody I don't like wants, and they're all merged into one as one system. Whereas, what if we didn't have a capitalist or a socialist government? What if we got to decide how we wanted to live our lives with different systems, and we didn't have this giant national organization spanning 3,000 miles across that's saying like, oh, everybody has to live under the same rules, and everybody from all the way over here has to help this person over here? Because if you're going to do that, you might as well go to the UN and say, oh, well, all the countries have to pay into one tax pool, and then the UN is going to get to decide how all that money gets distributed to pay for that. I know I say too many things, so I'm gonna stop there and let you respond. But I have one other thing I wanted to say.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So I don't agree with the notion that it's more efficient for the enterprises to hire, like, to keep certain people for way too many hours and certain lay off a ton of people. I believe there's studies that go against that, but that's not a really big issue. In socialism, we're not trying to incentivize private businesses to act completely differently. We're replacing the whole entire employment scheme with public employment. So now society itself is employing itself. It's employing its own resources. So it doesn't only care about consumers. It also cares about the employees as well. There's some empirical evidence to show that they will do hours, redivisions and things like that. But on to what you're saying now, you said that this system was its origin was in people trying to find, like, I want the best system, right? That's what you said, correct?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what everybody wants. Everybody has their own, like, oh, well, if they would just change this.
Okay. So I actually disagree with that. If we look at history, we see that throughout history, this is called historical materialism. If you want to, I guess, learn more about it if you're interested in it. But throughout history, we've had tons of different social systems, and each social system has had its own social classes. And basically, each system has been gone from one to the other based on technological advancement. At one time we had feudalism, and we had mercantilism, and then we had capitalism. And within each one of these phases, the class that is at the top of the social hierarchy basically controls the state. It controls the government. You can see in the original U.S. Constitution, it was not a constitution of everybody. It was a constitution of rich white landowners. They were the only ones who were allowed to vote. And so we see that states have been actually completely shaped by ruling classes throughout history. So whenever I don't think that our political system is trying to figure out how to make everyone happy, and it's not working. No, I think it's actually serving one specific class at the detriment of everybody else. And the solution to that is saying, hey, everybody, they're not serving you. This system isn't serving you. Let's replace that system with a system where we all have control, where we all are the ones controlling the government and society more generally. And it won't be perfect, right? Because with any large societal system, any system that is collective, because we live in a society, not everybody's views will always happen. But we have to make decisions. So it's better that we make those decisions based on the actual interests of everybody instead of a very small minority of the population who doesn't really care about us. Also, I like to acknowledge, I think you're a mutualist. You don't sound very much like a right-wing libertarian. You sound like a mutualist to me.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't consider myself right-wing.
Yeah, I was very kind of like awestruck when you're talking about that. I think I respect mutualism far more than anarcho-capitalism. But yeah, that's very interesting. You had one more thing you wanted to say?
Yes. So, okay, and I'll come back to that. But so, okay, Bezos, right? We're talking about Bezos and how he has all this, he has all this money and has all this power and control. And I get it. Like, if he's able to just buy out the LA Times, the New York Times, and like all the newspapers and put whatever propaganda he wants, yeah, that's a bad thing. At the same time, I think it's our responsibility as a society to understand when our sources of information have been corrupted, and to say we don't want to subscribe to that. But at the end of the day, if we consider that we have that power, nobody's telling us what newspapers we have to read, what I don't know where I'm going with that. What websites we have to use, what social media, all these other things. Nobody's forcing us to use anything. What real detriment to society is Jeff Bezos causing? Now, let me first rule out a couple things which I'll probably agree with you on, right? He's taking government subsidies. I don't agree with that, right? There's probably a whole list of things that involve government benefiting him or him changing policies, getting tax cuts, all these other things that I don't agree with. But no, he's not putting a gun to anybody's head and saying you have to buy from Amazon.com. So, and the fact that he might have $1 billion and a big house with a ranch and 1,000 acres and everything else. There's still plenty of land. And for somebody who has absolutely nothing and is in debt, that's not because of him. Their money didn't go to him. The debt wasn't created because of him. You could argue it was because of banks and that's more capitalism. But what detriment is he actually? What is actually criminal about what he is doing, and what is the actual detriment to somebody?
Okay, sure. So that's where we go to the surplus value extraction. The reason why people are so poor is because these people are so rich, and people are like, oh, what? No way. It's not a zero sum. Well, in a way, it is. Jeff Bezos makes billions of dollars by extracting value that his workers created and putting it not just towards his own income for the labor he actually does, but taking a ton of it just because he owns parts of Amazon and buying back stock and raising the stock price, which is all returns back into his pocket. So all of Jeff Bezos's value, all of his riches come from taking labor value, the actual contribution people make to society, and putting it in his pockets. So that's the number one bad thing he does. The second part is his interaction with the government is really bad, right? But it is inevitable. Every single time you have a very small minority of the population that's extremely rich, they always create a state that is always extremely corrupt that does all of their errands. They send the military to go, the banana republics, to keep the costs low and to keep the laborers down, and they'll coup any government that says we don't like what you're doing, we don't want to be exploited. They'll kill any of them. So the government is a natural product of their concentration of wealth and power. So having that knowledge, that is partially Jeff Bezos's fault too. It's not that he's just extracting value from his workers, but also the state's evil actions are a product of these billionaires and these extremely wealthy individuals.
So, okay. So I kind of agree with a lot of this, but let me first point out this first disagreement. So he's he's making money off of other people's labor, right? But that's a voluntary agreement, right? He didn't put a gun to their head and say, hey, come work in my fulfillment center or else I'm going to kill you. They needed a job, so they went there to do that.
Yeah.
Now this gets back to our agreement of people shouldn't have to work, and why do they need a job? Because think about it. 10,000 years ago, people weren't like running around like, oh my God, I got to get a job, right? Like that wasn't a thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So how did this happen? If a person is born on the earth today and they're right here, this little baby's grown up. Why does he need to go get a job when there's so many resources? Now, and I guess what I'm trying to say is when it comes to like us being able to extract resources out of the world for ourselves and not have to like do it in a way that benefits Jeff Bezos, the only person who's standing in our way is unless there's somebody, let's say there's a factory right here, whatever, pulling resources out of the ground, a mining operation. Unless that's already going on, yeah, we can't walk in and take that over, but there's other stuff over here and we can go over there and take advantage of that, except the government's going to be the one to tell us, no, you can't do that. Okay. Now, yes, Bezos might be in bed with the government and say, yeah, protect that for me because blah, blah, blah.
That's what they've always done.
Right. But now we have to look at the government. Why does he have the ability to do that? Because the government exists and the people support the government because it's supported by wealthy people. But at the same time, where does most of the government's taxes come from? The working class, not from the billionaires.
It's true.
So if we all say like, hey, we're going to refuse to pay these stupid taxes, the government loses its power, which means the corporations who are benefiting from the government's power lose their power as well, or at least most of it.
Okay, so there's a couple things that I want to get to here. First of all, yeah, a lot of the taxes do go on the working class, and that's part of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. They do control the state. The state doesn't serve you or me. It serves them. It always has historically, and as long as they exist, it always will. And part of it, you say, well, the people are okay with it. They're not fighting against it. Why won't they wake up? That's because Jeff Bezos does own the media. That's because the government and the CIA and all of these people, they're working together in order to keep people pacified, in order to keep this current social system. And as long as he's wealthy, that power will be translated into influence. That's how this current system works. Now, the second part, let's say all of that wasn't true, right? Let's say Jeff Bezos wouldn't inevitably corrupt the government or make a corrupt system and use state violence against people. Let's say none of that was true, and just people are voluntarily interacting with him, and he's getting very rich, but no one's getting like directly beat up or forced to pay taxes, right? I think it's still bad, and this is where the consequentialism comes in. Do we need him to do that job? Would we be better off if we had a public ownership of that entity? Yes. So he shouldn't do it anyway. Even if he's not directly hurting anyone, having a system where tons of people are technically voluntarily, interacting with everybody, but it ends up having suboptimal effects is not good. And we should switch to this new system that is more beneficial to people. So you see what I'm saying? I don't really like.
Well, I think you're in a way. Okay, so it's interesting because I hear in a way you're arguing for decentralization, but at the same time you're almost arguing for centralization as long as it's central to some social entity, right?
Well, okay, so we can't lie about we can't become, I forget what they call it, is it agorism where people, everybody's like, be self-sufficient and like go grow stuff on your own land and stuff like that. I think that actually hurts people because it makes them labor longer and do tons of unnecessary things and be less materially wealthy. Ultimately, I have that goal of liberation that I mentioned earlier. So I know that centralization, having some sort of collective entities doing these things are beneficial, even though I don't like the power systems that come from them. So I think, how can we keep all the benefits of having like large scale production without having that terrible oligarchical system? And that's where I talk about like a democratic system of controlling it, where we still have one entity. We're not splitting it up into like 15 different smaller ones, but we all have control over it, and no small minority of like political bureaucrats or corrupt billionaires are the ones controlling it.
I mean, I think I don't know. I think there's some good to that, but I think this is where you're still talking about one system. And I think, you're right about like the agorist thing, right? You're spending a lot more time and labor on things that you're not specialized in. You don't have machinery for and these other things, but like, I think they're both extremes, right? To have one company that manufactures education for everybody versus every individual is responsible for their own education. Like they're extremes, right? You have either one school or 350 million schools in the US, but there could be a fair middle ground where you have like maybe 10. And it doesn't have to be one. And I think at the time you come in and say, well, there's one that does this and it does it really well. I mean, let's talk about cell phones, right? You got Apple and Samsung, right? They both, it's not like they're either of them are suffering from, oh my God, we have to do all this work to manufacture our phones, right? They're both doing a pretty good job at efficiently creating this product. And let's forget about like,
Sure.
Extraction of labor and all this stuff for now. But to that point, like, but they're still competing. And because of that, one comes up with a good idea, like, oh, we're going to knock those other guys out of business. They come up with a good idea. Then the other one says, oh man, we're losing. Let's come up with something. And they come up with something better. And that's how we got to where we are now. If it was just one company, they wouldn't have to show up anybody, right? They wouldn't, oh, we have the best phone. We're the only people who make the phone. We're not going to make it better. Why would we care about that, right? Why? Like their fear is an incentive. The same way they control us with media and everything else through fear. Their fear is, oh my God, our product is inferior and we're going to lose money.
Okay, so this is like the innovation argument thing, and I appreciate this argument because I used to make it. I've been on the other side of this debate, not as a mutualist. I wasn't enlightened like you. I was a conservative for a long time. So when we're talking about innovation and like what actually drives productivity growth in the economy, there's this common misconception that you have like these amazing entrepreneurs, which are all scared about each other. They're all innovating. The reality is a lot of these companies are not innovating much at all. They're actually monopolizing property rights on certain things and trying to stop innovation from happening. Have you seen those folding phones? Saw those?
Yeah.
Those were invented a long time ago, except a couple companies monopolized the property rights on it, so nobody else could use it. When it comes to like actual innovation, let's think the CPU, lithium ion battery. Let's think the touchscreen, small cameras. I mean, there's so many crazy, amazing things. Where do they come from? They didn't come from private businesses. They came from Big Uncle Sam trying to do military projects and funding massive research and development of those things. And we both don't like the current government because obviously it was doing that for some pretty bad reasons. But we have to acknowledge that our best innovations that have ever existed have not come from competing enterprises. They've come from large-scale, long-term investment and development. And a socialist society would totally do way more of that. A lot less of this short-term stuff and the stupid stock buybacks and investing in weird gimmicks and ads and all this wasteful spending. We'll put all of that towards long-term investments that actually historically have shown to be the best yielding when it comes to actual productivity growth and innovation.
I'd have to disagree with that. I mean, yes, the government labs have created a lot of advancements, but at the same time, you have a lot of advancements that come from private businesses. You also have a lot of private businesses that don't go anywhere. So like, let's say, for example, you've got, they've created batteries out of hemp, right? Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, this is like a small, not super small, but like a hemp farm type operation. You know, they probably got like a few $1 million in size. It's not a government operation that came up with this. But for them to go large scale with that, obviously, batteries are regulated by the government, fuels regulated by the government. So we talk about hemp-based fuels. Those have been around for a long time, a century, I think. And like the government's regulation on those and their subsidies to the competing oil companies and all these other things. So there are things that come from outside of government that come from like these little tiny things. And I mean, like you can look at like the biggest, some of the biggest inventions, the bifocals, like, things like this, right? You hear about these inventions from a long time ago that we still use today. These things happen because somebody comes up and says, hey, I want to do this. And yeah, there's intellectual property, and I'm not a huge fan of that sort of thing. And I don't know. Am I going to say intellectual property is theft?
I like this mutualist takes, honestly, Dan. Go ahead.
But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah. So I think there is what comes from there. But if we were to, the problem that I have is if you say we have one system, by having one system, you're saying nobody else is allowed to do it. Because if somebody else was allowed to do it, you'd at least have two, and maybe they wouldn't be good at what they did. Maybe they wouldn't compete. Maybe there'd still be just like the one that's really good. I mean, like, there's look at laptops, right? You've got like 5 companies that are like that's it. There's a company called Librem that makes laptops and phones and everything. They don't have the money to invest in like the manufacturing process to make like, as finished a product as some of the $1 billion companies have, but there are still smaller companies out there. And this is more of a situation of like 5 to 10 versus 1 to like 5. But my point is that if we say we have to have one system, we're basically saying don't even try to be number 2. And that's where I have a problem, because that's taking away my right to say, well, at least I can try. I want to, like, yeah, maybe the odds are against me. I'm nobody. I don't have any resources, but I want to build something that's better than Apple or better than Facebook or something else. I want to try to build that. And if it's good, maybe people give me something. But if we already have one system and everybody's like, we have to have that, and that's our system, and that's the only way it can be, then that just eliminates the opportunity for somebody to come up with something better.
Okay, so a couple of things there. So I'm glad that you acknowledge a lot of the best research and a lot of the biggest breakthroughs have been done on large scale. But it is true, there's small scale innovations, right? There is occasionally sometimes where people have a really cool idea, and there's like that entrepreneur that they always tell us exists does actually exist. But we also must acknowledge that a lot of times that's a lie, and a lot of times these great breakthroughs have happened because of tons and tons of long-term investment. So I advocate a form of socialism that's far more pragmatic. Some people may hate me for this. They want to fully, completely like upset everything that we know about how our system works. I think about it like this. The extremely large scale entities, the commanding heights, the ones that create that terrible oligopoly, that have all this wealth and power, and that basically are planning their full internal economy because they're so freaking big, they're basically like countries. Those should be socially owned. Those should be publicly owned. The medium-sized enterprises and the small ones, we should create a system in which the workers slowly get the option to buy in. So you don't create this like very wealthy, like leeching capitalist, but you also offer people like you, for example, you want to create some sort of cool new battery technology. You can start doing it. We're not going to be like the socialist society, which is just like, no, like you can't sell that. No, like stop. We're just stopping those big guys from oppressing us and having a dictatorship essentially over this country and our resources and hurting us in so many different ways.
So I think this is actually something that I've tried to have this conversation with some socialists to say, if you don't like the way, let's just say you don't like the way Walmart's treating its employees. Walmart is a publicly traded corporation. You could just go buy all their stock and say, we own the company now. We have voting rights. We can tell the CEO, hey, pay your employees more, treat them better, whatever, or we're going to vote you out. And if you did that, then that corporation would technically become socially owned. And at the same time, you have a lot of businesses that do offer stock options to their employees, usually not to like the minimum wage employees, because they're I honestly, I think it has to do with they're not really sophisticated enough to understand the value of it. Because I've talked to a lot of these people and said, well, why wouldn't you, like, would you rather get paid in stock, or at least partially in stock? And usually their thing is, no, I just want the cash. And this probably has something to do with our education system, where like people don't understand the value of an investment and a bird in the hand, whatever. I think there's a lot of problems to be fixed there, but I think the system of making a corporation publicly available for trade is almost that socialist type ownership thing, except it's not centralized under the roof of the government, where it's like the government's going to control it and everybody owns a piece. It's no, everybody who wants to own a piece can own a piece, and yes, there's a small entry price, but I think that would be a more what's that?
I mean, yeah, you're just talking about how the current system is, and we know the current system is. Do you have something else to say?
Well, no. Well, the current system, it doesn't work because people aren't interested in doing that. But it's like, so you can force people to do that and say, oh, well, everybody's going to have a share of Amazon now. But then it's like, what good is that? What does anybody really care about that?
Okay, so I can respond to this. We're not forcing anybody to own. I mean, it's public ownership, so it's societal ownership, and it does a lot more than just saying, like,
what if I don't want to own it?
Everyone's a stock holder. No, it completely changes the incentive of the enterprise. The enterprise is no longer interested in constantly just making profits off of you or me. It's actually interested in providing a service and caring about its employees and increasing the well-being of people, as I've mentioned countless times. To say that, oh, well, you don't like the current system, why don't you just like buy out every single big corporation that chooses to publicly sell its stuff and then somehow make that societally run? That seems like a really weird solution, Dan.
No, my point is that people have no interest in that. My point is that is available today, and people are like, we don't want anything to do with that.
They don't have money. They don't have money. They don't have money because their incomes are low because of capitalism. So they can't buy in. They could choose, I want to buy like 5 Amazon stock. Like, great. Like, if everybody has like some sort of great awakening and they're like,
wait, hold on. How did Amazon get so wealthy in the first place? Because people gave it money. Like that's the thing. You can sit around and say like nobody has the money to buy Amazon stock, but the reality is that's the only reason Amazon made any money in the first place was because people gave it money.
The rich investors did. Yeah, the rich investors had tons.
No. I'm not talking about rich investors. You could have rich investors dump $100 billion in Amazon, but then what is it? Like, why would they dump their money into Amazon unless it's making money? Where I'm talking about the revenue that it makes from selling its products.
Oh yeah. People have enough money to like pay for like the things they need to live. They just don't have enough money to like buy massive amounts of capital.
Wait a minute. Everybody I know walks around with $1,000 phone in their pocket.
So
that represents $1,000 that they gave to several corporations that they split among several corporations. And I know people who spend that $1,000 every couple of years just so they can have the latest and greatest.
Yeah. So I reject.
They're not billionaires.
The precipice of like the premise this is built on. It's more beneficial for us to just publicly own these and take these companies and own them societally through that kind of intervention than to try to do this weird battle where we try to get everyone in society to all hop on the stock bandwagon, and somehow we all buy in by not buying. We don't buy iPhones, we don't buy any luxuries, we all buy in, and eventually they become socially owned through that process. I don't think that makes sense.
My point is that is available for us today, but we make decisions based on what we want. And okay, take this, right? Some people drink alcohol until they die. They kill themselves drinking alcohol, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the best decision for their well-being, but it's a decision that they made on their own, right? And so if we as a society are saying like, hey, I would rather I would rather buy something from Amazon, helping them to become a big, giant, powerful organization, but I will not buy their stock because I don't care. I don't care to have control over that power that I'm giving them when I give them the profit. That is a decision that every customer does when they buy from Amazon. And it might not be a healthy decision. It might not be good for us in the long run. But my point is that we have that decision, and maybe making smarter decisions comes from education. You have to learn, hey, alcoholism is bad. It's bad for you. It's going to kill you young. It makes you do stupid things. You get injured, all these other problems that come out of alcoholism. Maybe we need to learn the same thing that comes out of consumerism. And I think we have, especially like watching what's going on with the stock market and Bitcoin and everything over the last couple months, because there's so many people who are hurt from having their businesses shut down during COVID. They're taking this money and they're scared. They're not wasting it on bullshit luxuries and all these other things now. They're investing it, which is our represent. I mean, people are buying Bitcoin and all this other stuff now that's inflating those prices at a rate that it hasn't happened before, because they don't want to waste their money. They don't want to go buy a new car right now because they don't know what the future is going to be like. They'd rather save that money and invest it. And like, I mean, look at what's going on with GameStop. These are kids who are like putting in $5, $10, $100 a piece, or they're getting they're
sabotaged. But I think first of all, if you have everybody trying to invest in the stock market, like you said earlier, there's going to be price inflation of the stocks, which means only the people with the most money will actually be able to own the most capital. So it will end up being the same thing in the end, because the people with the most money will buy the most, and they'll be the most able to pay those extremely high costs. Eventually, capitalism always stratifies itself into a very small minority which own the most, and the very large majority which own very little. That's just the natural trend of things. Now, we could say that we kind of want everybody to wake up and be smarter. I'd agree with you, but that's not actually just a solution. That's just kind of like, I wish it would be that way. When I think about it, what is the best way we can actually create a better world for people? I don't think about it in the sense, I'm going to try to convince everyone out there to buy these stocks and hope that they don't take any sort of action against us like they did against that Reddit community. The government and stock people sabotage them. Just another example of their corruption. But I think we can take another action, which is revolution. And that might be something that we disagree on. I don't know. I think that this current state and this current oppressive system can really only be fixed by people coming together, not violently to kill anyone, but coming together and saying, we're done with this. We don't acknowledge your power anymore. We want a new government. And that is what I think is necessary. And in that, we don't have to go through this weird intermediary step. We can automatically set up that new social system that prevents that imbalance of power puts humans first and has all of those far greater consequences or effects than capitalism, far better for humans' well-being, as I keep saying.
Right. And I want to point this out too, because you talk about the sabotage that went on. Like you're talking about when they shut down the brokers and they weren't allowing people to buy. Yeah. So what's interesting about this is again, I'm going to point to government as not the only problem. I never want to say that this greed doesn't exist. The greed is always there, but government created a concentration of power to be able to do something like that. So, for example, stock owners used to be like, you could have like a piece of paper that was like a certificate that says these are shares, right? You used to have bearer bonds in companies and programs and projects. Bearer bonds, I think, are illegal now because you could use that for money laundering, right? You've got stock exchanges which are highly regulated by the government. I mean, think about this. Let's say you have a small business that wants to say, hey, you know what? I want to compete with the New York Stock Exchange. Oh, we don't have $100 billion to pay for the government licensing. So again, you have, it's 1, 2, 3. It's the American Exchange, the New York Exchange, NASDAQ. It's just a few exchanges. And each exchange, I found this out recently. A stock used to be able to list itself on multiple exchanges, but now, thanks to some government regulation, only one exchange is able to list a stock. So if I think GameStop is on New York, that's the only place you can trade that. So if the New York Stock Exchange comes out and says like, oh yeah, well, we're gonna do whatever we're gonna do to benefit whoever we want to benefit, they can now do that because all of that is in their system and they have absolute control over that. And so when you talk about a unified centralized system, like even if it's publicly owned, I guess my point is this, that it doesn't matter, because even if it's publicly owned, it's not like you've got 350 million people who are going to get an email that says, hey, should we shut down trading on GameStop? Vote yes or no. That's not going to happen. You're still going to have like 1 or 2 people who have control, who have to make that decision.
Well, we won't have stock markets in socialism. It won't be a thing, and there won't be those very powerful, wealthy.
Right, but whatever it may be. I mean, let's say it's a manufacturing facility, right? And like you could have the entire country saying, hey, this product sucks. All they need to do is change this one little thing. All they need to do is change the color. That's all we want. We want it in a different color. But you've got, the guy who's at the head of the organization who says like, no, we just make one color. That's all we do here. Ultimately, you don't have as much as you can say, well, it's public and everybody owns it. How do you get the person at the top to respond to the people at the bottom if there's no profit incentive because it's not a business? How do you get them to respond to what the people actually want?
Well, they're democratically accountable. In the current CEO system, they're not really accountable to anyone. I mean, they barely have to. They're like they'll crash the business, and all they have to do is don't harm profits, and you're fine. You could lay off everybody. You could like totally stop even selling cars like Dodge is doing and just start putting your money in the financial markets. It doesn't matter what you do. Just don't hurt profits too much and you're going to get your crazy high salary. So we're always going to have an issue of a level of accountability in these collective systems. But a democratically accountable system allows the people to actually be able to voice some sort of, say on that person. That's kind of a weird situation.
So does that mean like I'm gonna have to go to I'm gonna have to go cast a vote every year on who's manufacturing the phones and who's manufacturing the cars and who's
I actually think I think that in this system you're basically gonna have a set of representatives, right, that have a term limit of just one term limit. It's a very large deliberative body, and then they
like arbitrary rules.
They set up. I mean, everything's arbitrary. It's a large system, but like you have to figure out something to work out for people, right? And there's actually a great book that can explain this fully in detail for you, far better than I can. It's called Towards a New Socialism. There's a free PDF on the internet. I actually recommend you read that instead of just listening to me blabber about it, because it actually sets a pretty good vision of how socialism would work without creating some sort of corrupt oligarchy. And I think you should read about that. Now we are at 1 hour and 25 minutes.
Yes,
which is over time, and I do have to go.
All right. I had a note in my head to like wrap this up a little while ago, and I totally got distracted because I'm actually having an amazing time fighting with you.
Yes.
So awesome. But yeah, so let's wrap this up. Thank you. I want to thank you so much. I want to remind our listeners, this is what a productive conversation should look like. We're exchanging ideas here. We're saying things. I've heard things I've never heard before. Mike has learned some things, at least about me, that he's never heard before. So this is how a conversation should work. And like, yeah, we're always fighting in the comments on Instagram. But at the end of the day, we're still just two people. I think we've both demonstrated that we really want people to have better lives. And that's what most people want. Even like, dare I say, the Trump supporters and the Bernie Sanders supporters and everybody else. Ultimately, that's what they want. They're coming from a position of my life is a struggle and there are so many other people struggling like me. How do we have a better system? And this is how we get there. We have to at least have these discussions with people that we disagree with so that we can exchange different ideas and consider new things. And always, as I like to say, always go into every conversation with an open mind, knowing that everything that you know now might be completely wrong. Because if you don't, you're just going to be stubborn and dense and nothing's ever going to change. And if both people are having the same conversation in the same way, and they both can't be right if they disagree, then we're never going to get anywhere. So thank you again so much. Head over to taxationistheft.info. Make sure to support the show by buying the swag. I know capitalism. Micah, if you have anything you want to promote, go for it. The floor is yours.
Yeah, you can follow me at Micah Irfan on Instagram. It's just Micah_Irfan. You can also find me pretty much YouTube, Spotify, Twitter. Just look up Micah Irfan. I'm the only person with that weird combination of names. And also, I really agree with what you just said. In the history of everyone who's ever thought they were right, 99.9% have been proven wrong. Okay, so it's very likely both me and Dan are at least a little bit wrong. And you always have to be critical of yourself in order to one day find the actual truth, which we're all in pursuit of.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you again so much for joining me tonight. Sorry for holding you up, but this was an awesome time. I hope everybody else had a great time listening, and I will see you guys next time. Taxation is theft.